photograph with no faces. Yet everyone in it is a suspect. Welcome to Fogged Clue. I am your host, Merin. I love hearing from all of you. Tell me where you're listening from tonight. Your voices make this journey unforgettable. Let's investigate. The rain had been falling since late afternoon, a steady, tired drizzle that never became a storm and never quite stopped. It left the pavements glazed and the boulevard lamplights smeared, as if every object had a second, paler self beside it. Maigret sat at the kitchen table, his jacket off, a dark waistcoat that had grown shiny at the elbows, and his pipe cooling in the ashtray. Beside him, Madame Maigret folded the last of the white dishcloths and set them on the chair to dry. The clock on the mantel had a quiet, decisive tick. It seemed to take its time between each second. There was nothing to wait for, not officially. The office had phoned earlier to say that a statement had been copied and a witness released. He had said, good, and that had been that. They were not expecting a crisis, which is to say they were not expecting anything. He felt it in his body, the sort of emptiness that is not fatigue and not boredom, but a space where attention has nowhere to rest. You won't forget, his wife said, and it wasn't a question. Forget what? The card for Madame Vuillard, the daughter's wedding. She was not reproaching him. She was placing the idea on the table, with the bread and the salt. I'll collect it, he said, after a little walk. She looked at the rain beyond the window. Take your umbrella with the good ribs. The cheap one is sulking. He smiled at that. The cheap umbrella did sulk. It leaned reproachfully in the hallway corner and gave up in a gust of wind as if offended. He put on his heavy coat and the felt hat with the wide brim. At the door he hesitated, then reached for the umbrella with the good ribs. He could hear his wife moving a chair back into place, the ordinary, firm music of it. The smell of onions still lingered from dinner. He stepped out and the rain met the brim. Patient, polite. The boulevard was subdued, no horn blasts, just the soft noise of tires through water. A woman passed with a basket wrapped in oilcloth. At a cafe, men sat with their collars up and their hands around small glasses, not talking much. It was a night that asked for silence. He didn't hurry. He liked to feel the city before going to it as a policeman. He walked past the bakers. Closed, the loaves like wooden logs in the dark. A dog paused to shake off a spray of water that fell in a silver circle around it. He cut into a narrower street where the windows were closer to the ground and someone had left a radio low. A singer's voice in a minor key, barely on the border of the hearing. The stationers, a little place where they did not sell much but where the owner remembered faces, had put cards in the glass. Weddings, condolences, baptisms. He looked at the racks inside and saw the proprietor talking to a thin man with a narrow tie, the sort of tie that tried to make a point. The doorbell tinkled when he entered. Bonsoir, Monsieur Maigret, the proprietor said, as if he had been expecting him. It was not a trick. They simply saw each other often enough that it seemed planned. I need a card for Madame Vuillard, he said. Her daughter is marrying, something that doesn't shout. The proprietor, a small man with clean nails, took it seriously. He chose two, then put one back. This one. It doesn't try too hard. Maigret nodded and paid. He added a packet of thick envelopes and the cheapest string, out of habit. When he left, the thin man was still there, looking at a glass display of fountain pens with a kind of hunger that was not about writing. On the way home, he took a longer route. It was not curiosity. It was the simple pleasure of letting his feet choose. He crossed a small square and passed a photographer's shop he knew only by sight, L'Atelier Luxembourg, in gold letters that had lost letters over the years. The window was lit. Inside, on a table draped in green velvet, were the usual framed portraits, babies with combed hair, young men in uniforms, a girl with a ribbon that looked too heavy for her head. He would have continued, but something held him. In the center of the window, alone, was a larger photograph. It was an enlargement of a group in a garden, a wooden chair, a man standing behind it with his hand on the chair back, a woman seated, a second woman leaning in from the side. The background was a hedge. One saw, near the edge, the corner of a shed. The bodies were clear, the clothes clear, but the faces were not there. Not scratched, not torn. It was as if the paper had not taken them, as if a mist had settled over just those oval spaces. Above the frame, a handwritten card said, "Samedis, 10-8, Saike." For a moment he thought it was a trick of the glass, a reflection of the street. He stepped to the side. The faces remained blank. He leaned forward, one hand on the cool pane, and tried to decide whether they had been retouched or overexposed. The rest of the photograph had fine detail, the grain of the wood in the chair, the tiny tear in the seated woman's hem. But the faces were washed to a uniform light, without feature. The door inside opened, and a man came out of a back room carrying a wet print on a board. He was grey, where he wasn't black, with sleeves pushed to the elbow and a cloth tied round his waist. He didn't see Maigret, or saw him and chose not to, and set the board down to adjust a lamp. A bell in the shop sounded once, the sound of a string being plucked. A woman appeared. She had a scarf tied under her chin, though she was indoors. She spoke to the man in a low, urgent way, without agitation but with insistence, like someone reminding a child to wash his hands. The man shrugged, held up both, hands in a surrender that was also a refusal, and turned away. She looked toward the window then, right at Maigret, and in the moment before her eyes slid off him, he thought he recognized a kind of resignation, the look people have when they know the conversation is over, though it hasn't finished. He might have gone in. He did not. He was not there as the police, and anyway, there was nothing yet. He stayed a minute longer, noticing ordinary things, the dust in the corners of the frames, a fly drowned in the lampshade, the way the man's left shoulder dipped more than his right when he lifted the board. It was as if the shop had arranged itself to appear uninterested in the photograph in the middle of the window. He felt the first movement of a thought. Not even a thought, more like a change of weather inside him. Back in the street, the rain felt finer, as if the drops were smaller, the same way a headache can become noticeable by becoming less. He continued, cutting along a row of buildings where the entrances were deep and the stairs began almost at the door. In one, someone's bicycle leaned, not chained, just there. In another, a child's shoe lay on its side, too small for any of the feet he could imagine. The city offered these things every night, and most nights they did not arrange themselves around him. Tonight they did, a little. He reached home and shook the umbrella in the hallway like a dog. Madame Maigret called from the kitchen, "You got it?" He placed the card on the table. "This one. It doesn't try to be better than it is." She looked and approved with a small noise. "You're wet." "I've been in the rain." He sat and relit his pipe, tamping down the tobacco with a practiced, absent thumb. The house had taken back its temperature. The hands of the clock had moved, not much. "There's a smell," she said. "What is it?" He inhaled and found it. Not onions, not damp wool, not the wet dog smell of the umbrella. It was sharper and cleaner, a little sour. "Fixer," he said, "from a photographer's shop. They keep the window open at the back. The rain brings it." "You went far for a card." "I walked," he said, as if that explained everything, and it did. He watched the flame catch the pipe and settle. He did not talk about the photograph in the window, not yet. He did not know what there was to say. He saw it again in his mind, the bodies poised like notes on a stave, and where the melody should have been, a quiet blankness. When he undressed, he laid his coat over the chair and put the good umbrella to stand with the cheap one. He glanced at them, an old habit, as if to be sure they would not quarrel. In bed, he lay on his back and heard the rain decide to continue. He woke once in the night and thought of the woman's scarf. It had been tied too tightly, as if she were holding her jaw in place. The man's hands, when he raised them, had been stained in the creases. He thought of the E card above the photograph, Samedis 1018H, and of the empty faces that were not erased but never there. It felt like a question that had avoided words. He knew then he would pass that way in the morning without saying he intended to. Before sleep returned, he remembered a case months ago, a boy who did not come home from his job at the cinema, and the mother who spoke as if giving a weather report of a small town no one visited. People disappear in many ways. Sometimes you keep their bodies and lose their faces. In the morning, he would go to the office by a path that was not the usual one. He would stop outside l'Atelier Luxembourg and look in without pressing his hand to the glass. He might buy matches he did not need from the tobacconist next door. He would do these things because a photograph in a window had not been taken properly, and because a woman had looked at him as if he were the wrong witness. There was no crime, not yet. Only the fact that something ordinary had refused to behave. That more than anything was what woke him most mornings. Morning loosened the rain without quite ending it. A pale light tugged at the edges of the blinds, and the apartment smelled of coffee and damp wool. Maigret dressed more slowly than usual, as if the buttons had their own pace, and kissed his wife on the temple while she buttered a slice of bread with the concentration of a surgeon. He said nothing about his plan. There was no plan to confess. He took his hat, the good umbrella, and let the stairwell swallow him, one echoing step at a time. He set off a little earlier than he needed to, walking as men walk when they intend to arrive precisely on time by accident. The streets were still rinsed, gutters murmuring softly. A baker pulled up a shutter and nodded, recognizing in Maigret the sort of man who loved the smell of warm crust. Near the square, the tobacconist swept his threshold with more vigor than required, as if to teach the dust a lesson. When he reached l'Atelier Luxembourg, the window was lit, but the sign on the door still read, "Fermé." The lamp inside gave everything a weak, buttery glow. The large photograph stood where it had stood, a quiet provocation. He did not go closer, not immediately. Instead, he stepped into the tobacconist's to buy the matches he didn't need. The proprietor, a woman with eyebrows like commas, recognized him too, and, seeing the direction of his glance through the glass partition, said, "He keeps odd hours, the photographer." "Odd?" Maigret asked, accepting the small box as if it were more important than it was. "He closes when you think he'll be open, and he's open when you're sure he won't be. People in a hurry don't use him. People who can wait do. A good business model for the patient," he said. The woman shrugged. "And the woman who helps him?" he asked, as if the question had occurred to him in passing. "The niece," she said. "Or not. He calls her that. She wears that scarf even in July. I've never seen her laugh. Perhaps she saves it for Sundays." He thanked her, left a coin too large, refused the change with a hand, and returned to the photographer's door. It opened just before he could knock. The man from last night stood there, sleeves already pushed up, the dull belt of his apron damp in a line as if it had been washed carelessly. Up close, his age was indeterminate. His hair had gone grey unevenly, like a field cut by a lazy scythe. "We're not yet open," he said, but not with authority, more as a suggestion of order that might be bent. "I won't be long," Maigret said. He showed his card gently, not as a lever, but as a reassurance that one day the world might require it. "I'm a man who likes photographs." The man looked at the card as if it were a difficult negative. He stepped back to let him in. The room had the sour, sweet smell of chemicals and damp paper. Along one wall, framed portraits stared from the shoulders down, and the large camera sat on its tripod like a patient animal. The niece was there too, in the doorway to the back room, scarf tied the same tight way, hands flat to her sides as if they hid nothing and everything. "You have a fine enlargement in the window," Maigret said. "The garden group." "The valets," the man said. and then seemed to regret the name. Friends. Clients. It's curious, Maigret said, conversationally. The faces. The niece's eyes flicked to the window and back. The man's mouth made a shape that was neither smile nor grimace. Exposure, he said. A fault in the negative. And yet the chair is sharp. The hem, the hedge, Maigret murmured, as if to the camera. Exposure sometimes chooses its victims. The man wiped his hands on his apron. His fingers were stained in the creases, just as last night. Do you need something, monsieur? Maigret, he said. He did not add Inspector. The card had said it for him. No, only a question. Do the valets live near? Over the canal, the niece said unexpectedly, her voice low but clear. Rue des Peupliers, a house with a big tree behind the gate. She stopped as if she had betrayed a confidence, then added, they wanted the enlargement for an anniversary. Did they like it? He asked, an innocent question. They have not seen the enlargement, the man said quickly. We were waiting for a better print. The niece's eyes lowered. The man continued, more to the room than to the inspector. Sometimes the paper is unpredictable. You'll fix it, Maigret said, not as an encouragement but as an observation about who the man believed himself to be. He thanked them, allowed his gaze to pass once across the tables with their trays and tongs, and moved toward the door. At the threshold he paused. The scarf, he said to the niece, and touched his own cheek lightly. It looks tight. She reached up but did not adjust it. I get colds, she said, without conviction. Outside, the street had filled with a few purposeful people. He walked toward the office by way of the canal, which always calmed him, the water with its slow, stubborn life, the narrow boats that pretended to be asleep. He found the house on the Rue des Peupliers easily enough. The tree behind the gate was indeed large, a plane tree that had not been told it lived in a city and would have ignored the information anyway. The gate was shut but not locked, the sort of house that believed itself safe because it had always been. He pressed the bell and waited. A woman answered, not young, not old, one of those faces where time and worry had reached a compromise. She wore a cardigan with a pulled thread. Her eyes measured him, then the hat, then the rain. He introduced himself in the same mild way and watched the little tremor the word police set in her posture. It was not fear exactly. It was the recognition of a threshold. We are not in trouble, she said, hoping to make it true by announcing it. No, he said. I've just come from the photographer's. The photograph, she said, not asking. She held the door wider and led him to a room that had been made with Sunday afternoons in mind. On the mantel, a clock ticked with too much energy for such a quiet space. On a side table lay a narrower print of the same garden group. Smaller faces, and yet even here they were a blur, as if the paper had exhaled at the wrong moment. My husband wanted to send it to his brother, she said. We thought it would be simple. We stood as he asked. We didn't move, but when we picked up the small one, it was like that. Her hand hovered over the faces, not touching. He said he would make an enlargement for the anniversary, to see if it was better. It is worse, you say? He did not answer her question. Who is in it? He asked. She pointed, naming the shapes more than the people. My husband, me, my sister-in-law, Claire. The garden was his pride. He liked the chair there. And the photographer? Maigret asked. You've used him before? Yes. He is meticulous, she said, with a tone that could mean precise or fussy, depending on the day. His niece is silent. They make one think of a doctor with a nurse. Your husband is at home. At work, she said after the smallest hesitation. He has not been well, but he insists. She looked at the photograph again, and this time her face made the same resignation he had seen behind the shop window. It's silly, she said suddenly, almost angry with herself. I have the feeling that if I could remember what we spoke about just before the picture, it would explain this foolishness. Isn't that absurd? To think a conversation can change paper? No, Maigret said. Not absurd. He stood, letting the room return to its own rhythm. I may come back. If your husband returns feeling worse, send for a doctor before you send for me. She gave a small smile at that, the kind, polite people give to advice that is also a kindness. At the gate, he paused to look once more at the plane tree's bark, with its islands of flaking color and the wet leaves pressed against the iron. On the canal, a barge shifted against its mooring and settled again with a sound like a patient sigh. There was still no crime, only a chain of ordinary things that had arranged themselves with too much intention. A window left open to fix her, a scarf tied too tight, a house that believed itself safe, faces that would not let themselves be held. At the office, he knew there would be forms, routine, a file that needed his signature. He would give them what they required, and then, without explaining it to anyone, he would take a walk to the hospital listed on the husband's employment card that he had not yet seen but already knew must exist because people had jobs and those jobs kept their addresses. The day would not hurry. Neither would he. By the time he reached the quay, the hallway smelled of wet coats and black coffee, and the radiator clicked like a thing learning to breathe. A clerk had left a neat stack of forms on his desk, the top one already accusing him of delay. Lucas passed in with a sheaf of reports, said rien d'urgent, in a tone that offered him the gift of slowness, and went on. Lognon materialized like weather, codeine breath and a new cold in his voice, and looked at Maigret's hat as if it had caused the rain. Faces that won't take, Lognon said obscurely, as if he were continuing a conversation they had been having for years. Photographs never flatter the truth. They flatter the paper, Maigret said, signing the top form without reading it because it had nothing to do with anything. He asked the registry for the city directory and found the valet name where he expected, Rue des Peupliers, and in tiny type, an employment note that had the stubborn ring of fact, Hôpital Saint-Louis, Bureau. He made a short, human call to the wife of a retired doorman he trusted, learned from her cousin's nephew that the hospital porter at the east gate took his coffee at 9:30, and left again without explaining why. Hôpital Saint-Louis always wore the same expression, resigned, scrubbed, a little offended by the existence of illness. Under the arch, the porter's lodge glowed with brown wood and the smell of disinfectant that had outlived 100 patients. Maigret showed his card as if it were a recipe for stew and asked for Monsieur Valette. The porter, a small man who had given up on his hair long ago, sucked his teeth and consulted a ledger with slow dignity. "Accounts," he said. "Second courtyard. Right staircase. He was late yesterday. This morning he came on time." "Not well," Maigret said. "He's been pale for a week," the porter said, and then, as if making a joke for himself, added, "Accounts will do that." Up the stone stairs, in a corridor with lit glass doors and women who walked as if the floors were thin ice, he found a little office where a young woman with a blotter of neat columns guarded a telephone as if it were her dog. She had that hospital tone people get when they have to say no kindly several times an hour. He didn't make her say no. He showed the card, said he was inquiring for a private matter that was not an offense, and asked if Monsieur Valette was at his desk. "He stepped out," she said, glancing toward a row of grey coats. "Doctor's order for air. He had a fainting spell last Thursday. It wasn't much. Yesterday he left earlier after a call." "A call?" he said, casual, as if the weather had rung. "From whom?" She hesitated, not to protect a secret, but to be sure she remembered it properly. "A woman. The switchboard wrote the number. It looked like one of those older exchanges. Luxembourg. 17-something. He took his hat and said he would be back before 4. He didn't come back." Maigret nodded as if that were only one of the many outcomes life provided. And today? He was here at 8, she said. He looked as if he'd slept under a window. She placed a finger on the blotter where his name would be, not touching it. He asked for an envelope from the petty cash box. Registered letter fees. He is scrupulous. Yes, Maigret said, remembering the careful garden, the chair placed like punctuation. He is. On his way down, he let the building offer him its other smells. Boiled linens, petrified coffee, a cart's rubber wheel leaving a black honesty along the tiles. Outside, under the bare plane trees of the courtyard, he lit his pipe and watched 2 nurses cross with their heads together. People conspired here, but only against trouble. He walked back toward the canal without hurrying. The water took its time as always, reflecting a sky the color of old tin. A barge moored by the bridge had a man on its deck mending something invisibly small. The line between his fingers and the world was exact. On the Rue des Peupliers, the plane tree behind the Valette gate kept shedding flakes of itself as if to prove its reality. He rang, and this time a neighbor answered from the doorway opposite, a woman with a scarf of her own and the practical face of caretakers everywhere. "They're out," she said, happy to be useful. "Madame to the grocer. The sister, Claire, comes and goes." The husband left early as if the house had burned his trousers. "You saw the photograph taking?" Maigret asked, turning so his hat brim kept off the drizzle while his eyes remained friendly. "In the garden, 2 Saturdays ago," she said, enjoying the chance to be precise. "The man told them not to breathe. He talked to Monsieur apart near the shed. Then he put the chair just so." The sister kept turning, her head a little, as if a fly bothered her ear. The husband didn't like that. I could tell from the mouth. Afterwards, they drank lemonade without saying anything worth repeating. People think walls are deaf. "And the day?" he asked. "Sun, cloud, a white day," she said. "Light with no edges, the kind of day you rub your hands for warmth in July." He thanked her and left her to her doorway. At the corner, in a cafe that made a virtue of clean tables, he ordered a beer he hardly touched. The glass made a ring on the marble like a deliberate signature. He turned the matchbox the tobacconist had sold him between his fingers and traced the letters without seeing them. Luxembourg. A face that would not take. A man who left after a woman's call and did not return to his ledger. He finished the beer because leaving it would have made a point he didn't want to make and took a slow path back toward the photographers. On the way, he passed a stationery shop shuttered for lunch, its cards asleep in the dim. A woman guided a pram through a puddle with a competence that made the wheels look smart. Everything seemed arranged to continue. L'Atelier Luxembourg's had the door ajar now, a wedge of air carrying that fixer smell like a faint coin. Inside, the camera still stood with patient attention. The niece was behind the counter, counting envelopes that were all the same and therefore trustworthy. The man was not in sight. "He was called out," she said before he could ask, which meant she had seen him coming. "A pickup near the Jardin des Plantes. He said he would be back in an hour." "He left quickly," Maigret observed. She nodded. Her hands went on counting, betraying her only by their care. Too careful, as if the numbers might flee. "Did Monsieur Valette come yesterday?" he asked. Another nod, small, unwilling to take responsibility. "He asked to see the enlargement," she said. He did not like that the faces were. He said it was impossible. He asked if we had kept the negative safe. "We keep everything safe." "And what did your uncle say to him?" Maigret asked, using the word she had used. "That he would try again," she said. "He tried all morning. Paper, baths, light, time. It is like bread. Sometimes it refuses you." "It seldom refuses without a reason," Maigret said. He looked at the photograph in the window, the chair like a calm animal waiting, the hedge patient. If he stood a little to the left, his own reflection fell so that his hat brim lay where the husband's head should have been. He left without the satisfaction of a move made and crossed to the canal. On the bridge, he let the damp air fill his lungs. The next step was as ordinary as any. He would stand in the valet garden, in the very place the camera had stood, and look at the shed corner and the hedge and the chair, not because he believed the weather would confess, but because people put themselves in position, la notte, way a compass finds north. Somewhere between the half-remembered conversation before the shutter clicked and the woman's low voice on the hospital telephone, something had refused to be held. He would go and see how the light fell where faces should be. And then, perhaps, the reason the paper had turned its cheek. The garden received him as if it had expected a visitor without knowing which one. Shavings of bark lay at the plane tree's base, and the gravel gave the discreet crunch that makes people lower their voices. Madame Valette opened before he rang. Flour dusted her hands, and her expression had been ironed flat. She led him along the path when he asked to stand where the camera had stood. The chair from the photograph waited in the shed, tilting against a rake. She fetched it and set it where her husband had wanted it, slightly turned so the arm bit a neat line into the gravel. The hedge behind was a dense, disciplined green. He put his hat on the arm and stepped back the measured distance a careful photographer would have kept. The light had no edges. He lifted his hand to the height of a lens and watched a fine glaze pass over his skin. Madame waited, arms folded as if she had borrowed them. Here, the chair. There, her sister-in-law leaning in. Behind, her husband's hand on the back. "The man made jokes about statues," she said. We did not laugh. "Did you speak of anything just before?" She hesitated. Claire asked whether we should have waited for the bruise to fade. Her fingers touched her cheek, not the spot, merely the idea of a face. A cupboard door, she powdered it. My husband did not like that she mentioned it. It sounded like an excuse to the camera. He bent where the tripod would have stood and saw 3 little bruises in the gravel, sharper than the rest, as though the ground remembered competence. Beside them, a faint ring the size of a glass suggested a pause. "Lemonade," she said. "During. He told us to stay very still." "Did he speak alone with your husband?" "At the shed corner," she answered. "I could not hear." A gate clicked. Claire came in with a packet from the grocer's, the string biting her fingers. The bruise had settled into yellow along her cheekbone. The powder laid a light frost over it. She looked at him, at the chair, at the empty place where a camera would be. "We are not doing that again," she said. "Once is enough if the paper refuses." She took a breath the way people do when they promise not to cry for reasons older than the day. "At the click," she said, "it felt as if something had been taken we had not meant to give." Her third finger touched her jaw very lightly. She hid the gesture by turning to the plane tree. "Have you come to say the photographer tricked us?" "I have come to stand where he stood," Maigret said. She managed something like a laugh. "My brother thinks better paper will bring the faces back. He went yesterday. He returned late and slept as if he had been chased. This morning he sent a registered letter. I wrote the address." "To the photographer?" She nodded. Near the door, a folded slip with a postal stub lay under a dish for keys. He did not pick it up. He set his shoulder against a faintly polished spot on the shed frame, and from there the chair and hedge arranged themselves as in the enlargement. A woman leaning from the side would throw her pale mask across another's. Powder on a white day could erase a face without malice. It was not a trick so much as a cooperation between timidity and weather. "Thank you," he said. "I will not disturb you further." He left with the ordinary rain on his hat brim and the relief that comes when the weather inside turns from fog to drizzle. He would walk to the shop and ask nothing he could write down. He would look at the niece's scarf again and wait for the moment when she adjusted it without thinking. The street between the canal and the atelier learned his pace. L'Atelier Luxembourg had its door shut, the bells silent inside like a thought interrupted. Through the window he saw the camera on its patient legs and, on the table, a line of damp prints pinned by spoons. The niece came from the back room with a tray. He entered, and the bell gave its small, neat note. The fixer's smell met him even before the bell, a faint sourness that clung to damp paper and sleeves. He preferred such honest odors. They told him where people had been and what they touched without trying to impress him. Somewhere, a tap dripped, marking time for the trays, and he let it count 3 slow beats before he spoke again softly. "He is out?" "He delivers," she said. "He does not like to keep people waiting." "And you?" "I keep the baths," she said with a small pride. "It is exact work." He nodded and let his gaze rest on the tray. One print faced up, another garden, faces intact and unremarkable. He tapped the rim and the water made a tiny ring that spread and vanished. "Paper can be stubborn," he said. "It can be careful," she answered. "Sometimes it protects people." "From what?" She did not answer. A drop fell into a tray with the regular patience of a clock. He let the sound count seconds and waited for the scarf to move. The scarf moved, a small lift like a curtain stirred by a tram 2 streets away. Beneath it, a faint seam ran under her jaw, not fresh and not old, the kind winter leaves when it lingers. She saw his eyes notice and let the cloth fall again, neither guilty nor defiant, only practiced. Behind the partition, a tap dripped softly. Another ticked like a cheap clock trying to keep up. The bell sounded before he could ask more. A postman, cap damp, slid a leather book onto the counter. "Recommandé," he said, as if delivering bad weather. The niece wiped her fingers, paused a heartbeat too long over the signature line, and accepted a stout buff, envelope dented at one corner, something rigid inside. She pushed it toward the back room without looking at him. "For monsieur?" Maigret asked. "For my uncle," she said. "The return is Rue des Peupliers." Then, almost to herself, "The numbers look like a riddle." He tilted the envelope just enough to see the registration sticker. The sequence meant nothing, yet its shape tugged at the memory of the slip he had not touched on the valet dish. 2 digits, a hyphen, then 3. "May I?" he asked, and did not wait. He carried the envelope into the back. The dark room was a corridor of smells and patience. The uncle, Gervais, stood bent over a tray, the red lamp giving his skin an unhealthy hush. He looked up, saw the envelope, and wiped his hands in a gesture too quick to be careful. "From Monsieur Valette," Maigret said. He set it on a dry board. "Shall we?" "It is private," the man said. "Of course," Maigret answered, and waited. The niece had come to the lintel, fingers pressed flat to the wood. Gervais slit the flap with a thumbnail. Inside lay a waxed paper packet and a single sheet in careful office ink. The packet held the negative. Maigret did not need to see it to know. The sheet asked, without menace, for a print in which the faces were present, payment on delivery, the negative to be returned if impossible. Gervais let out air that might have been a laugh in a kinder life. "He doubts me." "He asks for what he paid," Maigret said, eyes on the rectangle now between damp fingers. The strip caught the red light like a throat. "You have tried." "I have," he said. "The paper eats the faces." "Reasons exist," Maigret offered. "Powder on a white day, a hedge throwing back light, a bruise someone wished not to remember. Paper can be sentimental. It protects modesty." The niece made a small sound. Gervais did not look at her. "It is not modesty," he said too fast, then shrugged, a gesture practiced in empty rooms. "I will try again." "And if you cannot, you will return the negative?" Maigret refolded the sheet and slipped it into the torn envelope with a care that did not belong to property law. "Was it you who telephoned the hospital yesterday?" "Luxembourg Exchange, the switchboard tells me. The atelier sits under Luxembourg, does it not?" Gervais placed both hands on the board and met his eyes. "I telephoned," he said. "He asked me to." "To call him in?" "To see for himself," Gervais said. He insisted the faces must exist because they existed in life. He is a clerk. Paper must obey. Sometimes paper resists, Maigret said. He turned to the niece. And sometimes people ask it to resist. She shook her head once. We do what the baths require: time, temperature, agitation. We watch them like children asleep. He believed her enough. He believed something else more, that the house on Rue des Peupliers had been trying to be decent about a small shame, and that decency, like powder, can blur what it touches. He thanked them and let the bell mark his exit. Under the awning he lit his pipe and, from the cafe next door, rang the hospital switchboard. He asked for accounts. The same young woman answered, protective. He apologized for intruding and asked at what time yesterday Monsieur Valette had taken the call. A little after 1, she said. He went white, as if told a secret about a person he did not yet know. Thank you, he said. He asked the origin. Luxembourg, 17 to 34. She read from a penciled note. He wrote it in his head without needing his hand. He returned to the atelier doorway and watched a boy pass with a newspaper under his coat. The world went on, making sense of itself in small paragraphs. The next sensible act was to put the negative and the people who wanted it in the same room. Not in anger, in light. He would ask the valets to come this afternoon and the uncle to prepare a bath as strict as prayer. If faces refused again, it would not be paper's fault alone. He left the fixer smell and the slow clock and walked toward the canal with a feeling like a thread drawn through cloth. Resistance, then the neatness after. He ate quickly so the coffee would stay warm and said nothing about where the afternoon would take him. Madame Maigret, wiping a plate, said without looking up, if you soak something too long, the colors run together and you don't know what you started with. He kissed her cheek and thought of trays where time mattered, of paper that, out of kindness or stubbornness, refused. By 3 he had telephoned the Rue des Peupliers and, with a voice that was almost permission, invited the valets to meet him at 4 at l'Atelier Luxembourg to collect a print together. He rang the atelier and asked the uncle to prepare a plain sheet and a fresh bath. At 4 that afternoon the rain had thinned to a rumor. Inside, Gervais stood already in his apron, sleeves rolled. The niece set a timer with undue precision and laid a clean tray. The bell announced the valets without arguments. Madame first, then Claire with powder sitting softly on her yellowing bruise, then the husband with his mouth drawn tight. We will make a straight print, Maigret said. No retouching, no impatience. Gervais slid the negative into the carrier, swung the enlarger ahead, and a grey rectangle bloomed on the paper. He masked nothing. When the timer rang, they moved like people obeying a ritual in which they did not entirely believe. The paper went into the developer. For a long half-minute there was nothing, only the drip from the tap. They watched the hedge arrive, then the chair, then cloth and hands. The faces did not come. Where the ovals belonged, a pallor spread and settled. The husband made a sound between a laugh and a cough. Claire's fingers found her jaw before she hid them in her skirt. Madame watched the paper, as if it were a window she was not permitted to close. Again, Maigret said mildly. More time under the lamp, so harder paper. Gervais obeyed without protest, which was itself a kind of protest. The niece reached toward the lens stop. Without looking at her, he said, "Leave it." She folded one hand into the other, and in that movement he saw the habit of obedience that sometimes makes accomplices out of people who only meant to help. The second print took longer to confess. A ghost of an eye seemed to form, then withdrew. The hedge held its line. The faces stayed obstinate ovals of daylight. One more, Maigret said softer. Stop down. Develop longer. Do not agitate. They did as told. In the red light, time stretched thin. When the image rose this time, something trembled where features should live, faint handwriting beneath the white. Claire's throat worked. The husband set his palm flat on the bench to steady it. The niece took a breath that lifted the scarf and showed the narrow seam under her jaw. Madame looked at the inspector and, for the first time, asked, with her eyes, for an outcome. "That is enough," the husband said suddenly, not loud. "We will not send it." "To your brother?" Maigret asked. "To anyone." He pressed his mouth until it whitened. "It is our garden. Our faces are our business." "No," Claire whispered. "He means—" She shaped her lips around a word that did not come. Madame set her hand on the table not far from his. "We quarreled before the photograph," she said, as if explaining a stain on a napkin. "About postponing. Claire said wait until the mark faded. He said the family would talk more if they had to imagine." "It was a cupboard door," the husband said with weariness, and then, catching his sentence like a ball gone astray, added, "It is not a crime to close something in haste." "No," Maigret agreed. "Not a crime, but cupboards do not choose faces." No one moved. From the street came the faint scrape of a broom on wet grit. In the tray the garden fixed into permanence. The faces resisted like breath on glass. "Sometimes," the niece said in a voice trying to be professional and not quite managing it, "paper can be asked to be kind." She did not look at anyone. "A little fog, a little light where there should be less. It is easy with pale powder and a day without edges. I thought only until the bruise is gone. Then we would make a proper one." Gervais closed his eyes. The husband looked at the scarf. Madame let out a breath that eased the room. Claire stared at the white ovals. "We will not arrest kindness," Maigret said, "nor certify it." He turned to Gervais. "Return the negative to its owner, as promised. Keep the window clear." "To show what?" Gervais asked, weary. "That ordinary things often refuse to behave," Maigret said. He put on his hat without haste and nodded to the valets as if they were leaving a church where the sermon had not been entirely understood, but had still done its work. "I will walk with you a little," he told them. "The air is better outside the red." They went out together like patients released into decent air. The canal kept its slow pulse. Barges nudged their moorings and forgot they had moved. Maigret walked a step behind, letting the three arrange themselves as they always did. Madame steady and a little brisk, Claire tilting toward the hedge line of buildings, the husband with his hat drawn down as if rain could be blamed for everything. No one spoke. Shoes made a conversation of their own on the wet stones. At the corner, he stopped before a cafe that had never pretended to be more than a place to sit and swallow something warm. Inside, the mirror had a crack that had been there longer than any of them. He took a table near the window and lifted 2 fingers. The waiter brought coffee as if he had been told years ago to do exactly that whenever this coat appeared. The valet stood for a second like people unsure whether to visit the sick, and then sat because sitting is what one does when cups arrive. He did not question. He set his pipe on the saucer, bowled down, and warmed his hands without an idea of cold. Through the glass, a boy dragged a stick through a puddle, writing his name for no one. The husband looked as if reading it. Madame turned her spoon in its own shadow. "You will write a report," she said, not demanding and not requesting. "I will write that a print refused faces," he said. "The rest belongs to you." The husband's jaw worked. He had the expression of a man who has carried a large object too far and cannot put it down without breaking it or his back. "It was a cupboard," he said finally to the window. "No," Claire said, gentle and without victory. "It was your hand." The words sat on the table between the cups like a small, correct bill. The husband's face did not move for a moment. Then the skin around the mouth loosened, the way snow slides from a roof when the sun finally finds it. He did not look at anyone. Madame did not reach for him. It was a house that had agreed long ago to survive the weather by staying still. "I was ashamed," he said to the mirror crack. "I am ashamed." "Yes," Madame said, as one says, "it is raining." and that was mercy enough to let something inside him sag. He kept his eyes on the window and spoke to his own reflection, which refused to meet him fully. Claire said wait, that she would look better on Sunday. I said the family would whisper more if we made a ceremony of waiting. It is a stupid thing to need a picture for a brother who judges by pictures. I'm not proud of brothers who judge, but I listened to them. We argued. I said something simple and cruel. I moved too fast. She turned. My hand found her the way a door finds a knuckle when one thinks of something else. He swallowed, and his fingers flattened against the table. Then I made rules for paper, because I could not make them for myself. Claire's eyes had gone very calm, the calm that comes after a wave breaks while the next gathers its grammar. The niece saw, she said. Not the act, the after, the powder. She looked at me as if she knew the shape of a thing without seeing it drawn. She did what she could with a tray. She did, Maigret said. And you, madame? I baked, madame said, and a humorless smile moved across the corners of her mouth. Then I dusted the chair, then I looked at the hedge and thought how good it is to have something that grows whether people deserve it or not. The husband breathed as if through a tight scarf. I telephoned the atelier yesterday to demand what cannot be demanded. I sent the letter this morning because clerks must straighten papers when they cannot straighten lives. Then I saw the prince today and knew the paper was wiser than I am. Silence settled, not to accuse, but to make space. The coffee went cool in the way coffee does when it has done its work. Outside, 2 students balanced a loaf between them like a baton and argued a point neither would remember at 40. You fainted last Thursday, Maigret said mildly. Was that shame also? That was the world being too bright, the husband said, a little surprised the body would confess so much. I had gone to accounts thinking numbers behave if one watches them. They do. People do not. Maigret lit his pipe and let it go out again. You will not send the photograph, he said, just to place the idea in a sentence where it could be examined. We will send nothing, madame said. Or we will send a letter without a picture and see if words can carry what faces could not. Claire's hand touched the saucer as if counting something that was not there. I will not powder tomorrow, she said almost to herself. Bruises go away faster when they are seen. The husband flinched and nodded in the same movement. If the cafe had been his own kitchen, he might have put his head on the table. Instead, he looked at the crack in the mirror and addressed it like a priest. I'm sorry. Maigret stood because standing often ends a cruelty. At the door, he paused. If your brother asks, he said, tell him the print did not take. It happens. Then a little lower. And if he asks again, tell him the faces are present. They are here. They will be there when the hedges cut back in spring. They stepped out into a rain that had turned into ordinary air. He watched them turn toward Rue des Peupliers, 3 figures finding their old places, perhaps new ones. The cafe returned to its spoons and the mirror to its crack. He paid and walked toward the atelier without hurry. He would tell the uncle to clear the window of that enlargement. He would ask the niece to untie her scarf once in a while and let the mark breathe. At home, he would say nothing of cupboards or brothers. He would tell his wife that the paper had been kind. He would mean the people had decided to try. He found the atelier with its blinds half lowered. Inside, Gervais had cleared the window. The garden enlargement lay face down on the velvet like a patient dismissed. In its place stood a small view of the canal in winter light. The bell tinkled. The niece looked up, then down again. Thank you, Maigret said, nodding toward the emptied space. People breathe more easily when windows show water. Gervais made a doubtful noise. People buy babies, he said, but water offends no one. Return the negative when the paper has stopped trying to rescue us, Maigret said. They will send a letter to the brother. It will do as well as a face. The niece's fingers paused. With a small decision, she loosened the knot of her scarf. The pale seam along her jaw sat there without explanation. He did not ask. You will not be questioned about kindness, he said. It isn't in the code. Gervaise's mouth quirked. Delays are my best prince, he said. He touched the waxed packet with the negative. You will take it? Keep it until morning, Maigret said. If the night offers a solution, let it. In the morning we obey the post. He left them to the red lamp and the slow dripping and walked back to the quay, where the station coughed up paperwork. Lucas had left a note on his blotter. Photographe, rien de pénal. Lognon stood by the radiator. You have solved the weather, Lognon said. You will be promoted to umbrella. Faces refuse when insulted, Maigret said mildly. He wrote 2 calm lines in the registry. Domestic matter, no proceedings. Lognon sniffed and then softened. The hospital telephoned, he added. Accounts. A woman called. She said your clerk with the plane tree would not be in tomorrow. Maigret rang back. The same young woman, gentle by profession, reported that Monsieur Valette had come in pale and steady, sat very still, and let a doctor listen to a heart that disliked attention. He will go home for a few days, she said. He asked me to tell you there would be no letter today, only after sleep. Sleep is the correct form, Maigret said. He finished what the day demanded and crossed the river in a bus that shrugged at corners. At home, warmth made a different weather. Madame Maigret had set a pot to burble. The room smelled of leeks and pepper. He will write instead of sending a picture, he said when she asked how the afternoon had arranged itself. Words are faces that don't tremble, she said, placing bowls. Sometimes they tremble too. Eat. He ate. They spoke of the laundry rope, of a draft under the door, of nothing that needed memory. Ordinary talk put weight back where it belonged again. After the washing up, he smoked by the window. The cases one calls cases rose and sank like barges. This one felt like a hand moved away from a throat. Before bed, he wrote a note for the morning, Luxembourg print, return film, hospital, and slid it under his watch. In sleep, he saw the Valette hedge without any people. Morning brought a washed sky and the clatter of the rubbish cart. He reached the atelier as the key turned. Gervaise lifted the blind as if raising a weight. The niece swept a true line of dust into a pan and left the scarf looser. No solution from the night, Gervaise said, handing over the packet. None required, Maigret said. The post walks faster than thought. He put the negative into his inner pocket like a borrowed book. Keep the canal in the window. The niece smiled properly for the first time. The seam vanished into a general gladness. We will, she said. At Rue des Peupliers, the plane tree made a private applause in the small wind. Madame opened before he touched the bell. Flour dusted her hands. Something was looser at the corners of her mouth. He sleeps, she said. Let him, Maigret answered. He set the packet on the table. Your property. Burn it or keep it. If you burn it, don't hurry at the last. She looked at it as one studies an old letter found in a coat that no longer fits. We will keep it for a while, she said. Claire came from the back, bare-faced. The yellow had nearly gone. She carried cups and poured as if the liquid were a truce. We wrote 3 sentences, she told him without embarrassment. They seemed right. They will be, he said. He did not ask to read them. He looked at the chair by the door and the hedge beyond the glass and felt the house take a long breath. On the step he turned once more. If you need a photographer next spring, he said, choose one who talks too much. Claire unexpectedly laughed, the clean, quick kind that doesn't pretend. We will choose one with bad paper, she said. Bad paper is sometimes the best, he answered, and went down to the gate, where the rust knew his glove by now. He left the plane tree behind him and let the street set his pace. The morning had the flavor of tin and wet dust, Light came without conviction, and yet the pavement shone as if pleased to be noticed. He walked along the canal where a barge's rope rubbed a soft complaint against iron, and went down the 3 steps to the little fruit stall, more out of habit than hunger. The woman pressed 2 pears into his palm with the authority of mothers everywhere. He paid and didn't resist the wrapping paper's fuss, because fuss is part of pears and mornings both. At the quay, the radiator behaved better than yesterday, and the clerk had mislaid his accusing pile of forms. Lucas appeared and leaned on the door as if it required permission to stand. "Your photographer?" he asked. "Harmless," Maigret said. "Useful for once." "Lognon says you solved a photograph." Lucas smiled. "I let it go. Unsolved," Maigret corrected, and Lucas nodded as if that were a familiar victory. "There was a memo about stolen bicycles near the slaughterhouse," he answered with 2 sentences that offered neither apology nor zeal, and felt his pipe settle into an agreeable draw. For a while he did nothing that could be reported. He reread a form. He watched a droplet creep along the window frame. He considered whether pears ripen better in a bowl or a pocket. When the telephone rang, it surprised the office into a small echo. "Hôpital Saint-Louis," said the young woman who sounded like clean linen. "Monsieur Valette is resting. The doctor has written convalescence and underlined it twice. He asks that you not expect him before Monday." "I expect only Monday itself," Maigret said. "Thank you." He left later than he meant, and found the atelier with the door open and the particular quiet that belongs to rooms where people concentrate without speaking. A girl in a baptism dress, bored and shining, stood on a stool while her mother arranged a ribbon that would never lie straight. Gervais adjusted the camera with grave ceremony. The niece, scarf loosening into something that was almost only a scarf, held a small tin bird on a string to make the child look up. The child refused and studied the window instead, where a cloud crossed like a thought changing its mind. When the click came, everyone pretended they had expected it. The mother breathed. The child asked if she could keep the bird. The niece said, in a tone so flat it might have been kindness, "No, but it will remember you." Maigret paid for matches he did not need and let Gervais nod toward the packet he would post later. "Safe," the photographer said, which was not a boast. An old man came carrying a flat parcel under his coat and asked for a copy of his late wife's portrait. "But not so sharp," he added, lowering his voice as one does in churches. "She deserves the soft that her life didn't give her." "Paper has its own mercy," Gervais said. The niece's fingers, quick and practical, slid the portrait out. The woman in the picture looked straight at the camera with the good-humored suspicion of people who have been right more often than thanked. Maigret felt himself saluted in passing and stepped aside so memory could have room. Back outside, the air had warmed by a degree and the city began to smell faintly of yeast. He stopped in the post office, bought 3 stamps, and addressed the card to Madame Vouillard with a stylus that left honest grooves. The thought pleased him that a rectangle with modest congratulations would travel farther than most arguments. He posted it and stood a moment before the red mouth as if expecting an answer, and received, as often, a useful silence. On his way home he chose the longer streets, the ones that show a city's laundry rather than its face. In a cobbler's window, a shoe rested on its wooden foot like a modest animal. In a bookshop, a second-hand atlas sagged against a detective novel, as if seas needed borders, and borders needed murders to make them interesting. He looked at his reflection in a hardware shop, where the brass had been polished into small suns, his own features held, blurred by rain but obedient to glass. The thought passed that some faces are truer in reflection than in print. The thought left him without insisting on a conclusion. At dinner he told his wife that pears ripen better on a plate because fruit bowls trap old conversations. She made the sound she makes when he pretends to be more foolish than he is. "Did the paper behave?" she asked. "It chose a side," he said. "Good paper," she murmured, and set the pot to the smallest flame. Afterwards they read without asking each other what was on the page. Later still he smoked at the window until the street lamp found its evening steadiness. A couple crossed the square under one umbrella and argued amiably about parsley. Someone above sneezed and then apologized to no one. The city rehearsed being itself and did not require applause. Before sleep, he thought again of the atelier with its red lamp and the niece's careful hands, and of the way two sisters can arrange a house's weather without moving the furniture. He pictured the valet garden returning to itself. The chair back under a tarpaulin, the hedge gathering dull birds, the path remembering feet without judging them. He saw the negative in its packet in a drawer that smelled of cardboard and glue. Perhaps it would be kept. Perhaps one day it would be made after a spring of light and ordinary courage. Perhaps not. Paper is patient. So are hedges. He slept badly and well, the way a heavy man does when his mind has been lighter than usual. Morning returned carrying buckets in the courtyard and the rumor of a cat who had caught nothing. The city would ask again for crimes and receive them. He would answer as best he could and, if he passed the canal, look for the winter view in the photographer's window, just to be sure the water still knew how to repeat itself without getting bored. If the niece had left her scarf a little loose, he would consider that the weather had turned. If not, he would wait. Some truths, like photographs, take their time in the bath before they decide to appear. The next day arrived clean as a washed plate. The rain had gone somewhere else to practice, and Paris pretended it had never known umbrellas. He took the long route to the quay, past crates clattering and a greengrocer whose fingers were black at the creases from handling coins and pears with the same care. He let himself be carried by that sensible traffic which ignores policemen when they are merely men on their way to work. On his desk waited a thin envelope with the hospital's crest. Monsieur Valette would be absent through Monday. Rest prescribed, pulse improved. The line ended with a doctor's name that looked like a diagnosis by itself. He slid the note beneath the blotter and set his hat on the radiator to forget the shape of yesterday. Lucas leaned in to report that a burglar had stolen nothing but a roast, which meant the burglar was a husband and dinner was saved. Lognon, wrapped in a scarf that did not suit him, remarked that photographs were treacherous witnesses. Maigret agreed in a way that did not invite further thought, signed 2 forms that needed no soul attached to them, and left again without explaining where his feet were taking him. He crossed the river on foot and took his morning from the city like a slow sip. The atelier's window showed the winter canal. A pigeon had left a chalky signature on the glass that the niece polished away in patient circles. Inside, Gervais tied his apron as if to receive a bishop. A young man fought his way into a stiff collar while his mother fixed a strand of hair with spit. The bell confessed him. "Posted," Gervais said, tapping the rectangle of velvet where the packet had rested. "Gone before 9. "Good," Maigret said. The niece glanced up. Her scarf sat almost careless at her throat. She lifted her chin toward the door and said nothing, which was approval enough. He watched her set a small child on a chair that had lost a screw so long ago it had learned to stand crooked without falling. The red lamp waited in the back, steady as a heart one forgets to hear. The click was quiet and authoritative, as if it recorded good behavior rather than faces. He went out and followed the canal to the garden street. The plane tree made a quiet of its own. At the valet gate, he did not ring. Through the bars, he saw a woman shaking a rug, the dust lifting like old thoughts politely dismissed. The chair sat just inside the shed, its arm catching light like something forgiven. He stood a while. No one saw him. The moment had the mildness of a room after the guests leave and the glasses stand empty, patient and clean. At noon, the stationer congratulated him for remembering Madame Vouillard's card before she did. He accepted the undeserved praise because people enjoy being right about other people's reliability. He ate a sandwich at the counter of a bar, where the radio spoke of trains arriving and leaving as if these were original ideas. He did not think about trains. He thought about paper that refuses, about a hand that remembers to lower itself before it moves, about sisters who brew coffee and choose silence because it is quicker than apology. In the afternoon, the quai demanded a proper piece of police work, a missing boy who had simply gone to watch a dog on a different street and had forgotten to tell anyone. He found him by habit and by the logic of small hearts. The mother cried without making noise, and the boy promised never to love an animal so much again. They both lied with a sincerity that made the world tolerable. Evening came calmly. He walked home with the day arranged inside him in quiet layers. In the kitchen, Madame Maigret had set a dish that would be better tomorrow, which is a way of saying it was already good. He told her about the roast thief and the restored child. He did not tell her about the garden. He had told her already, and she had understood before he finished. She said, "The niece." And he said, "Lucer." And that was a conversation long enough for what mattered. Later, he took his pipe to the window. The street kept its appointments. A bicycle bell that sounded like a polite cough. 2 men sharing a newspaper, a cat who did not hurry because it knew who owned the corner. He thought of the photograph that had not been made and of the one that might one day exist. The same hedge, the same chair, other faces, not better ones, only faces allowed to arrive in their own time. It would not be a triumph. It would sit in a drawer or on a mantel and grow old the way honest things grow old, and by staying and letting itself be looked at without speeches. A small rain returned just before bedtime, merely to prove it still held the key. He listened to it learning the gutters again and thought, as he had at the start, that sometimes you keep the bodies and lose the faces, and sometimes the faces return when you stop insisting on them. He imagined the negative in its envelope among household papers. Recipe clippings, a receipt for coal, a letter from a brother who might learn to ask fewer pictures of people and more of himself. The city yawned and settled into its night with the soft authority of habit. Morning would send him by the usual way. He would pass the atelier and nod at the canal in the window. He would buy matches he did not need and watch the niece polish the glass without hiding her throat. If the bell rang and someone came in cradling a portrait that asked for mercy, he would think of the valets and be content that mercy had been practiced. He would sign the right forms, mislay the wrong ones, and be grateful that some mysteries prefer to end as weather does, by tiring of being noticed. Before sleep took him, he decided that if anyone asked what had been solved, he would say that a chair had been put back in its place, a hedge had resumed its work, and a hand had remembered the weight of air. He would add, if pressed, that a photograph had failed with dignity. Then he let the rain finish its lesson, and the room grew quiet except for the clock with its patient step, and the city walked past the window in soft shoes, and somewhere a shutter closed without anger, and it was enough. Sunday arrived with a market's clatter, the kind of morning that makes the gutters look industrious. He left the apartment late on purpose, as if the day needed time to become itself, and walked beside Madame Maigret to the stalls where parsley pretends to be a forest and fish lie like punctuation. She chose carrots as if interviewing them. He carried the bag and thought about paper. They parted at the baker's. He took the longer street toward the canal, not because he had business there, but because the city repeats what it gets right. L'Atelier Luxembourg had left the blinds half raised. The winter view still occupied the window with its obedient light. Inside, the niece was polishing glass in patient circles. She lifted her head when he entered. The red lamp was off. The trays sat rinsed and turned on their sides like books not needed today. "No weddings on a Sunday," she said, which sounded like a rule learned in a childhood that preferred rules. "No enlargements either," he said, and she smiled in a way that admitted relief. Gervais came from the back with a broom and leaned it in a corner because ends of days prefer corners. "A letter for you," he said, as if the post had wandered into his shop by mistake. He held out a small envelope without a crest, the paper cheap and honest. The handwriting was neat and cramped, the kind that fights a lifetime of ledgers. Maigret turned it once in his hand and recognized the Rue des Peupliers before he opened it. It did not say much. Monsieur Valette thanked him for his correct handling. He wrote that the negative now lay in a drawer with a comb, a cemetery key, and a receipt for coal, that they would not burn it yet, that spring might ask something different of them. He wrote that he had told his brother there would be no photograph, and that his brother, who always preferred proof to faith, had answered with 2 lines that surprised him. As you wish. Health first. Then a cramped signature, and a postscript in a different hand, Claire's, saying only, "It is almost gone," without naming what "it" was. He folded the letter and gave it back to himself by putting it in the inside pocket, where tobacco had left its permanent geography. "Good paper," he said aloud, and Gervais, hearing a compliment that belonged to people rather than trays, made a dismissive noise to keep from agreeing too warmly. The niece had left her scarf loose. The seam did not seem to her worth hiding today. "I will change the window again," she said. "People like babies on Mondays." "Tomorrow is Monday," he agreed. On the quay, he met Lucas carrying a parcel that smelled of onions. "My aunt sends you her regards," Lucas said. "She says you solved a case without moving your feet." "I moved them enough," Maigret said, "but the case solved itself when everyone stopped instructing the paper." Lucas nodded as if that were the sort of sentence that makes soup better. "Lognon says photographs are liars. He proved it with a mirror." "Lognon is a mirror," Maigret said, and they both allowed themselves the small friendly meanness. He walked alone for a while. The sky had put on a grey that did not threaten. Barges went about their business with the dignity of animals that believe in repetition. He crossed the bridge and took the narrow street where the cobbler's sign creaked and a cat slept on a basket of clothes pegs like a foreman on an excellent job. He stopped before the post office and, without knowing exactly why, bought a single stamp and slipped it into his wallet like a charm against impatience. In the afternoon he found a chair by the cafe window and let a beer go warm while he watched nothing in particular. It is a good way to watch everything. A boy tested a new cap by running and losing it. A girl corrected his route without speaking. Across the street the stationer arranged cards that congratulated, consoled, forgave. The world has shops for nearly everything. He thought not of the photograph, but of the space where faces had refused to appear, that pale, deliberate absence. It had not been a machine's fault, though machines were happy to accept the blame. The clue, if there had been one, had been a certain tenderness masquerading as failure, a niece who knew how to fog a paper without looking directly at what she spared, a sister whose powder asked the light to be gentler, a husband whose shame had been so clumsy it wanted rules to keep it upright. He had smelled fixer in the rain and recognized the odor of people rescuing each other badly and well. That had been enough. Toward evening, he took a detour along the Rue des Peupliers. The plane tree had kept its leaves longer than anyone predicted, stubborn or loyal. It is hard to tell which in trees and men. Through the gate, he saw the chair under a tarpaulin, its arm catching a last stripe of light. The house had the look of a place that had made a decision and then remembered dinner. He did not ring. A dog 2 doors down barked once. The civil way dogs say, "I have noticed you," and then lay down again to continue its important work of waiting. At home, Madame Maigret pulled a stew from the oven that had been thinking for hours. They ate without hurry. After, he dried plates while she folded a towel along the grain and told him that Madame Vuillard had cried at the card. Happy tears, sensible ones. "Paper can be kind," she said. "It can," he answered, and set the dish flat on the rack so it would not warp. He told her about the drawer with the cemetery key and the coal receipt. She nodded, as if the presence of those objects together proved a marriage. When he sat at the window with his pipe, The first drops found the street like scouts. A man raised his collar. A woman pulled her hat down. 3 children stood with faces upturned, accepting the report the weather was delivering from somewhere else. The clock on the mantel made its polite journey. Across the square, someone closed shutters without irritation. He felt the day settle inside him as a sheet settles in a drawer when it is folded by someone who knows how to fold. He did not think of what needed writing tomorrow. There would be forms, and he would supply them with his patient hand. If anyone asked him about the case later, he would say there had been no case, and he would not be lying. He would say there had been a photograph that refused an order, and, in refusing, told the truth that everyone already knew and could now afford to pronounce. He would say that sometimes the clue is a blank, and the blank is the size and shape of mercy. When he went to bed, he placed his hat on the chair and his watch on the card from the stationer and listened to the small, modest noises of a good apartment, the pipe in the wall settling, the soft tick of time. Rain worked carefully at the gutters. He thought of the niece polishing the glass in the morning and of the letter folded with the coal receipt. The last thought before sleep was of the hedge in spring and of a camera that would not need to be persuaded. The faces would arrive when they wanted, or they would not, and either way the garden would be green.